Good morning to those who are joining us on Facebook. On Friday, Governor Hobbs issued an executive order calling for the appointment of an independent commissioner to review execution protocols in Arizona. Attorney General Chris Mays and I met on Friday afternoon, and it afforded us the opportunity to discuss this issue. It was a respectful meeting where we shared in the tremendous responsibility that we have as elected officials who are sworn to uphold the law. In my role as county attorney, the most serious thing I do is determine whether a person should face the ultimate penalty, the death penalty. This is not something that I take lightly. Likewise, I know this is something that the Attorney General must approach with great deference. At the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, there is a thorough and thoughtful process when deciding if a jury should be presented with the option of the death penalty for a crime. The decision-making process is guided by state statute, and it relies on a review of the facts and evidence in each individual case, and that includes mitigating and aggravating factors. As a career prosecutor, I am extremely familiar with this process and was so when I became county attorney. But for those who are unfamiliar with the responsibility, I appreciate the need to understand and learn about this aspect of our criminal justice system. This is why I respect the efforts of the governor and the attorney general to ensure an informed process. This is an act of government that should be handled with the utmost integrity. That being said, I also respect and took an oath to uphold the Constitution and laws of the state of Arizona. These govern the role that we play in upholding the rights of victims. Arizona's Constitution guarantees victims the right to a speedy trial or disposition and prompt and final conclusion of the case after the conviction and sentence. Yet families of those murdered by those sentenced to death walk a long and painful path. For most, this is a journey that is decades long. And that is why I hope the review process outlined in the governor's order will be both expedient and transparent. It is my hope that my elected peers will act with integrity and uphold the rights of victims just as the rights of the accused already have been upheld. It is my hope that as a state we will not abandon our promise of justice, because justice delayed is justice denied. In the coming days, I will be sending a letter to the Attorney General to verify which individuals have exhausted their state and federal appeals and ask that upon the conclusion of the executive office's expedient review, that justice be carried out. And with that, I will take your questions. Howie?
Good morning.
Good morning.
My first gig with you here. Let me start off with you talk about the justice delayed, justice denied. I've talked to some prosecutors who say they don't pursue the death penalty. They talk with victims and say, you're not going to survive this process. You may die before this process is over. Whereas if you go for life without possibility of parole, it is resolved much quicker, and the victims' families get to see the end of it. Why then pursue a process that can take decades?
So when we are talking to victims in potential death penalty cases, we give them a very thorough explanation of what that process is going to look like. So these are people who have hung in, if you will, for a very, very long time. They're aware going in just how long this process takes. And what I would say is, yes, justice delayed is justice denied, but inadequate justice that does not meet the facts of the case, is also denied. And in fact, it's never happens.
Do you believe that the death penalty, whether it's decision or the imposition by jurors, because it all has to be done by jurors now,
Yes.
is, I don't know what equal is the word. I see a lot of data, including here in Arizona, there are, something like 13% of folks on death row are black. They don't make up 13% of the population. People who can't afford the $800 an hour lawyers and the consultants and the investigators. Do you believe that the death penalty can be sought fairly given these inherent issues in there?
Well, I would disagree with your characterization that there are some people on death row who were not able financially to avail themselves of the justice system. My experience has been that extremely experienced attorneys are required to be appointed to each case, 2 attorneys on each case. If people are indigent, or they can afford the attorney but they can't afford the experts, the court will pay for those experts. So there are resources available to these individuals. In terms of the racial composition of death row, what you have to look at are as I do when I'm looking at a case, I'm looking at each individual case. I'm looking at the facts of those, I'm looking at the mitigation, I'm looking at the aggravation to make sure that that case warrants the ultimate punishment.
Which leads to one other question. Taking up from anyone else here.
Okay.
We have this list of aggravators and mitigators.
Mm-hmm.
Aggravators, some of them are clear. Pecuniary interest, shooting a cop, or something like that. Then you've got things like a crime that is committed in especially cruel and heinous manner, as opposed to normally cruel and heinous. Some of this seems to be really squishy in terms of how do you draw that line and how do you get 12 jurors? This isn't a judge. In the old days, the judge would make those decisions. This isn't a judge makes decisions. How do you deal with the fact that some of the aggravators are a little squishy?
I also would not agree with the characterization that aggravating factor that you mentioned is, quote, squishy. Heinous, cruel, and depraved pertains to the manner in which it is committed. It also pertains to the actions that follow, whether there's, for example, reveling in what has just happened. And there are instructions given to the jurors to explain what that is. Obviously, they hear argument from both sides of the attorney, both sides by the attorneys, and they make a decision. But it is the U.S. Supreme Court that has decided that it should be decided by a jury.
What's your personal feeling on the death penalty, either as it returns? I know it's the law. I appreciate you're required to follow the law.
Mm-hmm.
What is your personal feeling on the death penalty, propriety, or as it returns?
I don't think my personal opinion on the death penalty is what is its issue here. My oath was to follow the law, and the lawmakers in Arizona, as well as the public, have decided that Arizona is going to be a death penalty state. They've listed the aggravators that I have to take into account. I'm also aware of the mitigators that have to be looked at as well. And I review every first-degree murder case that is filed in this office committed by an adult, and I make a decision based on that case, following the law. Jimmy.
Hi. So I just asked the same question to the AG, and they told me that there are actually 22 people who have exhausted their appeals based on their definition. Don't know how many of those are from Maricopa County. But so when you said that you would reach back out and ask that justice be carried out, can you tell us in a little more detail like what that means and what you hope will happen?
Well, I'm going to be reaching out to the Attorney General to, compare, to make sure that our lists are identical to the Attorney General's list as far as which cases have exhausted both their state and federal appeals. And at that point, I'm going to be watching what Governor Hobbs does. She said she's going to appoint someone to study this, and I'm sure there will be a commission or committee. And I'm going to be watching that. I am hopeful that it is expedient, because once somebody has exhausted their appeals, the next step procedurally is to seek an execution warrant. So I'm not going to put some sort of arbitrary timeline on this, but I expect it to be expedient.
Okay. And is it accurate to say then, if you think if the review process comes out, they make the appropriate changes, then you'll go ahead and request that the people who have exhausted their appeals from Maricopa County be pursued for warrants of execution?
in due course, we will pursue the punishment that the jury imposed, or, yes, the judge.
Can I ask a follow-up as well?
Go for it.
12 follow-ups maybe? Okay. I had a question about the aggravators as well. Do you have an opinion on how many Arizona has and the ability that they give to seek the death penalty? Do you feel like we have too many aggravators? Would you prefer that there were more? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Actually, it was my office that a couple of years, 3 or 4 years ago, worked with the legislature in eliminating some of the aggravators, and I was part of that recommendation process. So I think the aggravators that are on the books now are appropriate. Could always, consider other people's opinions in that, and go from there.
Okay. And does the announcement from the governor and the AG change how you do business day to day? Has this changed any, the way that you go about planning things, seeking different prosecutions? Has the new announcement changed anything in the way you're doing business as far as death penalty cases?
So the announcement by the governor does not change the way the Maricopa County Attorney's Office does business. One of the things that I was able to discuss with Attorney General Mays was my expectation that the Attorney General's office, which, as you know, handles the appellate process of a death penalty case, that we will receive the same sort of attention that it has received in the past, those cases, and the same sort of resources. And Attorney General Mays assured me that if any changes were to be made, that she would notify me of those.
What about, the study that's being proposed is from the point of somebody being sentenced to being carried out. We have seen over the years, I'll use the term loosely, and it's not meant to be a red letter, but some botched situations where the people can't seem to find a femoral vein, can't seem to do it right, and it takes forever, it seems like. And I know forever is an interesting issue. What changes or assurances or medical training, what would you like to see so we don't see Jimmy and I writing these stories about how long it took somebody to die because they were poked 72 times?
Well, I did attend the most recent execution of Mr. Hooper. That was not my observation of that process, but I fully expect the department to be able to carry out an execution that comports with the 8th Amendment and is not cruel or unusual. That is not something that I would be supportive of if it was not within compliance with the Constitution.
Do you have any concerns about how executions are carried out in Arizona, and do you support, this process that the governor is now undertaking?
Well, I would just refer back to my statement. I understand the process that the governor is taking, but I expect it to be expedient. There has been, as you know, a lot of litigation about the death penalty and how it is conducted in Arizona. I expect the department to be able to carry it out lawfully and constitutionally.
Let me put a finer, she asked, do you support the study? I know you say you understand the process. Let me see if I can push you a little further. Do you support the fact that they're doing a study, or do you oppose it?
I am doing neither. I understand they're wanting to do a study, and I'm looking to how that is done, but I do support it being done expeditiously.
Do you think it's warranted, knowing that they had to redo the shelf life of the drugs and that there were documented 3 times in a row difficulties just getting the job done? I mean, do you think that warrants at least a review?
If there is a situation where an execution is not carried out in a constitutional manner, obviously that concerns me greatly, because as a county attorney, my job is also to protect the rights of the accused. As I said, that was not my observation of the last execution, and I expect that they will look at certain things, but those protocols that are now in place have been, as you know, litigated.
What was your observation with Hooper?
My observation was that he was laughing through much of the process. He was jousting verbally with some of the staff. There was a bit of a delay because, as the medical technician reported, he was looking for a smaller needle so that it hurt less, and he peacefully went to sleep.
Do you support allowing Jimmy to go to the next execution?
Okay.
That's up to the
okay,
DOC.
That's fine.
I have to ask questions because we had a station that can't be here, so,
That's their fault.
this is off topic.
Okay, go on.
County Attorney, can you talk a little bit about, the Super Bowl coming to town and efforts to curb and address, maybe an increase in sex trafficking that can occur that goes along with these large events?
Yeah, so the question about whether, because the Super Bowl is coming to town and oftentimes there is sex trafficking that increases with that. I would just remind people that sex trafficking exists 365 days a year. And yes, sex trafficking does increase around large events. And at the time that the Super Bowl is going to be here, there are also going to be 2 other significant events, including a car show, including a golf tournament. And so what I would urge is for the public to be, aware. If they see something, say something, report it to law enforcement. We, as the county attorney's office, are in communication with the police about law enforcement efforts. We intend to hold people accountable for any sort of sex trafficking that occurs here, whether it be the trafficker or whether it be the customer. Sex trafficking, as you know, my background is as a sex crimes prosecutor for 25 years, and I can tell you sex trafficking has a devastating impact on the victim, and so it is incredibly important that we take that seriously. And I also know that there are some trainings going on, including one today, of people within the hospitality industry, for example, to look for signs and indicators that sex trafficking is taking place. So that's an incredibly important effort.
Do you think, excuse me, there are adequate laws to address sex trafficking in Arizona?
Arizona actually has very robust laws to address sex trafficking. I have worked with the legislature over the years in drafting these laws and improving these laws. And so people should be very aware, if they're thinking of committing sex trafficking within Arizona, that they are facing extremely harsh punishments, appropriately so.